Hi, I'm Glenda and welcome back to Won't You Be My Neighbor, the blog. This is season 1, episode 6. You can stream on Amazon Prime if you want to follow along. It's Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, volume 1. And this is episode 1176, titled Jealousy, Grand-pare's Granddaughter is Coming for a Visit. I'm also going to discuss Mr. Rogers' view on gender in this episode. This is 1971 and the episode is in color. Here's the synopsis along with my observations and reflections. This episode is the first in the week, and it's jealousy that we will reflect on with Fred this week. Mr. Rogers opens the episode asking about our weekend and lets us know that he's been thinking about us, again building trust by following through. In the Friday episode, he said he would think of us over the weekend. He tells us that he has been practicing his writing over the weekend. Mr. Rogers is writing with a fountain pen. He names the parts of the pen, such as the nib, and shows us how to fill the pen with ink. He then goes on to show us how he practices calligraphy, and I appreciate that he shows us the pages of exercises that he has already completed, rather than simply exclaiming that he has practiced. Mr. Rogers tells us that in order to improve this skill, he went to a class and does special exercises. Picture shows a film of the class that Mr. Rogers attended. I also appreciate that Mr. Rogers is showing children a video of adults learning something new. I don't think children see their parents learning something new very often. This has the unfortunate consequence of our youth not realizing that we have the potential to grow and change throughout our whole lives. If children never see adults struggling to grow, we can't normalize this process, nor can we encourage individuals to strive for growth throughout adulthood. I sometimes think children see adults as a polished final product, complete and imperfectly unchangeable. Lack of viewing adults in the learning process instills a fixed mindset in children. This has caused us to collectively grow up thinking that people cannot change and that they are wholly good or bad with no potential. Mr. Rogers says that following the class he practiced, and the more it practiced, the fancier his writing became. Mr. Rogers says that everyone's writing is fancy or unique, just like them. He tells his young viewers that you can often tell who has written something just by their unique handwriting style. Mr. Rogers then sings the song, Everybody's Fancy. In this song, he says that everyone is special in their own way. Anti-trans individuals use some of the song's lyrics to justify their views. They claim that Mr. Rogers had it right and was in favor of traditional gender roles and sexuality. However, this couldn't be further from the truth. Fred Rogers was very progressive for his time, not only socially, but in his views regarding child development and early childhood education, as well as racial equality. Fred Rogers had a diverse guest list of individuals working on the show, a children's show unheard of at the time. Francois Clemens, Officer Clemens, was one of the first Black actors with a recurring role on a children's television program. It is true that Fred was a product of his time, as we all are. It is also true that Fred would not let Francois appear openly gay on this show. And Fred was afraid that it would not go over well with his viewers or supporters, and he would lose the funding to do this work. If we judge by today's social expectations and standards, Fred Rogers' choice would be unacceptable. However, Francois Clemens himself addresses this issue, which you can watch in a video that I'm going to link on the blog or in the comments below. Clemens also discusses an exchange with Fred when wrapping up one day. Mr. Rogers concluded the episode by hanging his sweater up in the closet and says, "You make every day a special day just by being you, and I like you just the way you are." However, Clemens felt that Mr. Rogers was looking right at him at that time that he has said it. And Clemens asks Fred if he was talking to him. And Fred replies, "Yes, I have been talking to you for years, but you heard me today." Clemens says, "It was like telling me I was okay. I was okay as a human being." And that was one of the most meaningful experiences he'd had. While I can't speak for Mr. Rogers himself, and I can produce no direct statement or quote that this definitively confirms his view, we have a few more indications. In 2003, the Westboro Baptist Church picketed outside Fred's memorial service, and the leader of this organization said in his manifesto that Fred Rogers was in hell because he provided support and comfort to gay people. I would also like to point to Maxwell King's book, The Good Neighbor, The Life and Work of Fred Rogers, in the chapter titled On Air Ministry, pages 114 through 115. And in this, he says, Fred's tenure at the seminary was during a time of deep dissension and controversy for both the Presbyterian Church in America and for the seminary itself. There were hard divisions between the very conservative United Presbyterian Church and the more liberal and progressive practitioners of the faith. And their battles were so hard fought that they finally caused the seminary to appoint a special commission to release a set of recommendations to heal the divisions within the faculty and the institution. Rogers was always on the liberal side of the equation, and he later became a parishioner and sometimes preacher at Pittsburgh's 6th Presbyterian Church, a famous bastion of the progressive. The 6th Church emphasized inclusion, and it was known in part for welcoming gay and lesbian parishioners, a position that was wholeheartedly supported by Joanne and Fred Rogers. Fred was very happy in our 6th Presbyterian Church because there were no exclusions, recalls Joanne. There's no exclusivity. If there had been a church called Reconciliation, I think he would have joined it. Joanne emphasizes Fred's belief that religious faith should bring all sorts of people together and not pull them apart. She recalls that Fred kept trying to arrange a date with a woman for one of the male friends they had met at the 6th Church before their new friend finally told Fred and Joanne he really wasn't interested. Finally, he said to Fred about the 3rd time they were together, he said, "You know, Fred, I'm gay." And Fred had no idea. It didn't matter one way or the other. Fred's social leanings were strongly progressive, but he learned from both his seminary experience and his television role to be circumspect about his views. Fred's nature was the opposite of quarrelsome, and he eschewed the endless left-right debates of the seminary. Some of his friends in Pittsburgh were disappointed that Fred didn't speak out publicly on behalf of the disadvantaged or vocally champion tolerance and inclusion, the values in which he so fervently believed. But Rogers was worried that such a public posturing would cause confusion with the parents and children he reached on television. And he always felt that actions, kindness, understanding, and openness in relationships were more important than the words. According to Dr. Andrew Purves, professor of Reformed theology at the seminary, Fred's political reticence stayed with him forever. I don't remember him speaking on the floor of the Pittsburgh Presbytery. I have seen him at meetings of the Presbytery just sitting quietly by himself. Last, if you visit the 6th Presbyterian Church's website today, you will learn that they are an open and affirming church. They advocate for equal rights and inclusion of the LGBTQIA+ community, welcoming the community in religious life as far as marriage and roles within the church leadership. In the most recent newsletter, they are showing a 3-part documentary series titled Rise of Christian Nationalism, Attack on Democracy and Freedom of Religion. According to Joanne Rogers' obituary, she was a member of the 6th Presbyterian Church at the time of her death in 2021. I am making the assumption that Fred would have continued to attend church with Joanne if he had not passed away and therefore supported their current missions. In putting these pieces together, and due to a lack of evidence to the contrary, it's more likely than not that Fred Rogers would have been a supportive ally and likely adopted a more modern way of providing support. And from the child development perspective, children watching the show are probably in the range of 2 to 5 years in age. Developmentally, this places them in the magical thinking stage. And at this stage, some children have a great deal of anxiety that they will instantly or magically turn into the opposite gender. This anxiety comes at a time of development when a child is becoming more aware of the differences between genders, both physically and socially. I believe that what Mr. Rogers was trying to do was to alleviate those fears in very young children. Mr. Rogers goes on to show us how to craft a frame out of paper, and that this frame can be used to make things more fancy. Mr. McFeely delivers a fancy scroll to Grand-père, and it's from Colette, Grand-père's granddaughter. She will come to visit on Wednesday. I appreciate how Mr. Rogers continues to incorporate foreign language study into this show by way of these two reading and translating the letter. With the letter is a gold-framed photo of Colette. Henrietta Pussycat arrives and views the photo of Colette. Henrietta learns that Colette will be coming for a visit. Henrietta is sad upon reception of this news, and Lady Aberlin calls on Henrietta, but she doesn't answer. X the Owl and Lady Aberlin grow concerned when Henrietta doesn't answer, and when she finally emerges, she is unrecognizable. Henrietta is dressed up with makeup, jewelry, and is speaking French. X the Owl tells Henrietta that he likes her better when she's her regular self. Lady Aberlin agrees and goes to visit Grand-père to better understand what is going on with Henrietta when she sees Colette's picture. We return from the land of make-believe, and Mr. Rogers explains that Henrietta thought people wouldn't like her unless she dressed fancy, just like Colette. He says we've always liked Henrietta no matter what she wore. Mr. Rogers then sings "It's You I Like." Lady Aberlin arrives and shows us her fancy writing. She demonstrates various styles of fancy writing and expresses to us that she likes to make cards for people. Mr. Rogers comments that Lady Aberlin's writing is fancier than his, and she even made it up herself. He then explains that sometimes when you're working on learning something that's new, and when someone comes along who is better than you, it takes the fun out of it. Then he says he will keep working at his fancy writing. The program closes with Mr. Rogers singing the Tomorrow song and says, "You always make the day special by being you." My additional observations, connections, and reflections. Fred normalizes the process of learning something new, and he reinforces that practice is required to get better at something. He shows that you need to do exercises to learn as well. I think this is a very important thing to show. When we learn something new, we would like to get to the fun part or the results, but with most things, there is some level of monotony before we can reach that point. If we don't realize that the process is the same for everyone, it's much easier to give in to the frustration. And if you reach that point, you might even give up entirely. Henrietta feels that she has to change herself to be loved and accepted, so she starts dressing and acting like Grand-père's granddaughter. However, it doesn't seem to make Henrietta happy. Feelings of jealousy can arise when someone can do something better than you. And Fred's advice so far is simply to keep practicing. Let's see where his advice leads us throughout this week. I wonder if Fred is trying to tie practice and jealousy together to emphasize that it takes practice to learn to deal with strong emotions. It's a lifelong pursuit, but it gets easier to manage with practice. Even the most disciplined people I know sometimes mismanage their feelings and it just pops out. Fred points out that everyone is unique and special. Fancy is the word he uses. You don't have to try to be someone else to be fancy. You're already fancy in your own way. We make the day special for those around us by simply being ourselves. So the question for myself was, do I love myself enough to see my own fancy? Questions for you, and feel free to answer in the comments. How often do you tell those around you what you think is fancy about them? How would the world be a different place if we believed an adult had the same amount of potential as a child? And most importantly, won't you be my neighbor?